I would remind people that most of us have come a long way to develop relationships and friendships and build our family. And COVID has created a lot of stress in people's lives in that. There's a lot of separation, a lot of anxiety, a lot of issues that are going on. And it's one of those issues that exist when you leave long-term employment. We're going to discuss that on Consider This Program today. Well, good morning and welcome to Consider This Program. I'm your host, Joe Clark.
And I'm Grant Soliven.
And Grant is a guest star, co-host, whatever you want to call yourself today.
Star.
One of our lead advisors or senior advisors, we call him at the Financial Enhancement Group, and happy to have Grant along today. We are talking, the theme for the whole show today is coping with uncharted waters, things that you're just not used to having happen. Now, Grant, you left Purdue after you graduated.
I did.
I do want to point out you graduated.
Thank you.
Like I said, one of my students years and years ago. How well of a job have you done at keeping in touch with the people that you you were in class with?
Well, that question hits me right to the core, Joe. The answer is not very well.
Well, and I would argue that you have done it better than the majority of people I know.
Oh, well, thank you.
Because I've heard you talk about Eric Penna. And you actually work with people at the Financial Enhancement Group that you went to school with.
Also accurate.
A little bit different.
That's more on you, though. You kind of
I'm a connector. That's my job, right? I try to bring people together. But you still had that issue. Now, you also worked for another company before you came to the Financial Enhancement Group for how many years?
My gosh, almost a decade.
Almost a decade. And how many of those do you keep in touch with?
3.
Yeah. And how many were there?
Hundreds.
Yeah. And so that is one of the challenges that happens in this disconnected world. When we change environments, when we leave to go different places, many times that connection is broke. Things that we relied on and just responsibilities that we had to taking care of other people. And it was I remember, as when you're younger, there's some things you just can't imagine. Right. And I remember when we started working in the Lafayette Arena, there used to be a Lilly manufacturing plant up there. It got bought out. And this one gentleman showed up at my office one day, and he'd been working there, I think it was 33 years, and left at lunchtime. So he'd been working next to people for, I don't know how long those people, but I mean, decades. And didn't tell him goodbye, didn't do anything, and left at lunch.
Wow.
Now, I hope none of you are in a position where you're working at that kind of an environment where you would never want to have that. But there are going to be things that separate us from long-term employment. And I think if anything that we can see that has come out of this craziness of COVID, that we've got to have better ways to stay in touch and communicate. Right, so I am not a huge social media fan, even though the Financial Enhancement Group is on Facebook. And, we've got the Financial Enhancement Group Tidbits page that you're more than welcome to join, where we put out content pretty much every week, our newspaper column and things of that nature. But I think we need to have ways to be able to keep in touch with people who really do matter. Now, that doesn't mean you need to have 1,000, itty-bitty relationships. Right? But we do need to have a level of connectivity, I think, with people, especially in crazy periods of time like this.
I would agree.
So, we're fortunate enough at the Financial Enhancement Group to take care of more than 1,000 families, and we work very hard to make sure that we're staying in touch. Every one of them is assigned an advisor, assigned an associate advisor, and we make sure that we have family updates, or at least they're offered. About 90% of our families we get to see every year. Sadly enough, some of them were on Zoom this year, or at least last year. It's hard to get everybody every year, not because of our choice, but because other people's lives are too busy, and they just say, "Hey, we've been here for 20 years. We want to do family updates." And so here's what I would recommend in my experience. I look at the wedding pictures in our hallway. When I go in, and 70% of the people that are in the pictures, I don't see anymore, right? That were at our wedding or in our wedding. Those relationships break down. Your relationships with your money, ladies and gentlemen, can break down too. It is very easy to do a set it and forget it kind of mentality. And you're gonna hear us talk a little bit about that in other aspects today as we go through part of the financial world. But when Grant came to Purdue, he was supposed to buy a $240 textbook. I didn't make you buy it, did I?
No, you don't. Thank goodness.
And that's because I read it, and it's kind of like, in the 14 semesters that I taught, there wasn't one semester where I didn't have to correct myself. It wasn't that long ago where I had to correct myself on this show from something I said 2 weeks earlier because the tax code changed, right? New rules, new policies came out. Those kind of things happen. And I know in relationships, it's easy for those kind of things to break down. And I'm not going to tell you how to live your life with your friends and your college roommates and all that. I just want to help you understand with your money that those relationships can break down too. So the curriculum that we put together at Purdue, that the CFP board signed off on, Purdue signed off on, and then being the entrepreneur I am, I trademarked it. So it's my baby. But the Financial Enhancement Group uses it. Grant uses it in his meetings. But it's the 5 critical elements. So Grant, you want to walk them through the 5 critical elements?
Absolutely. So the first one is your life after work. And there's a reason we don't call it retirement because realistically, people don't just expire when they stop working. They continue on throughout their life. And arguably speaking, they're busier sometimes now than they even were when they were working. So we never call it retirement. It's your life after work. Then there's the investment playbook. The reason we don't call it your return is because it is a journey. And we talk about that often. The big one's the tax plan. This one's often, many times we're seeing new families come in the office. This one's often overlooked. Most families either know a little bit about investments or a little about taxes. No one understands both completely.
Now, you said tax plan. Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
So tax planning is, when we talk to families and talking about how things break down, Joe, in relationships, CPAs, I'm not going to pick on them in any way, but CPAs tend to get stuck in their thinking, which is tax planning. How do I reduce my family's tax obligation now? And they forget that tax codes change because they're so focused on today. When we talk about tax planning, Joe, we're looking at not just today, but down the road as well, the future. What happens when a tax code sunsets? What does that mean? How does that affect your required minimum distributions, et cetera, et cetera?
The financial journey, if you will.
Absolutely.
Right. So what are the other 2 elements?
So the other 2 elements are the legacy plan. And actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. Before that one is the good, bad, and ugly of life. Luckily for us, for our families, that is, they're retiring once. We've had to retire many times. Or, going back to myself, even the first piece is we help families get to your life after work. We do it every day. And so for when there's a lot of anxiety around a situation, so the death of a spouse, your life after work, building a legacy plan. We've done this so many times. It's almost like we could do it with our eyes closed. And so for our families, it's comforting because we get to live through the good, bad, and ugly of life almost on a daily basis. So we help families through that. And the last piece is building that legacy plan. And most people, Joe, they come in thinking, what happens to me when I pass away? And I think what you've done very beautifully and helped our team learn and understand is this. Not only what are we going to do with your plan and your legacy when you pass, but more importantly, what are we going to do when you're still here? And someone needs to take care of you while you're still around.
Absolutely. So the whole point in this relationship part and coping with uncharted waters is understanding that things change. So, I'm not a counselor. I'm not going to tell you in terms of what to do with your relationships, but I think so many times we develop a relationship and then we kind of put it on pause and just assume that it's taken care of without understanding things could be happening in my life or things could be happening in Grant's. My job on this show and Grant's job is to help you understand that things change in that relationship with your finances. Your financial vision changes over time as we move forward through life, as we progress, as the kids get older or we lose parents. Those things can happen. So those 5 critical elements, again, are your life after work, the annual tax planning. It has to happen every year. You've got to have qualified people help with the tax reporting. I have a CPA. I've got multiple CPAs, and we have Brett Spangler even on our Financial Enhancement Group team as a CPA. They're invaluable people. You have to have them. But you've got to also be focused on that annual tax plan that has to occur before December 31st. And that's where you can really have that separation of relationship with your money. The IRS is happy to separate you from your money if you're not careful. It will happen, right? So your life after work, the annual tax plan, the investment playbook, right? We've got to know how we're going to behave when the market looks good and when the market looks weak, and what we're going to do in between. And please never forget, there is a huge difference between the economy and the market. They're two very, very opposed things. I will tell you that they tell me academically, over an extended period of time, markets and economies function in some form of correlation. I would just tell you, over my 32 years, that's been less often than actual. Short term, they just do not connect. I won't tell you that they are magnets that push themselves apart, but they just don't behave that way. The fourth, life happens. As Grant said, the good, bad, and ugly, the many things that can happen in your lives, the good stuff, sending kids to college, the bad stuff, dealing with an aged parent. Hopefully you're only going to have to do this once in your life. We've done it hundreds of times, and that's why we have checklists to help us get through it. And then last but not least is that legacy plan. And a legacy is more than just money. It's how do you transfer your values, what really, really matters to you, to your next generation. So if you give us a call at 800-928-4001, ask for Michael. We'll get you signed up for a Next Steps meeting. Or you can go to the website and get signed up for a Next Steps meeting. We'll give you 90 minutes of our time to walk you through those 5 critical elements. Tell you things you're going to want to consider today, things you're going to want to consider in the future, and if we choose to partner together, what FEG will do for you.